Chapter 15 of Uller Uprising. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Acacia Wood. Uller Uprising by H. Beam Piper. Chapter 15. A Place in My Heart for Hildegarde. The company fleet hung off Keegark at 15,000 feet, in a belt of calm air just below the seesaw currents from the warming Antarctic and the cooling deserts of the Arctic. There was the Procyon, from the bridge of which von Schlichten watched the movements of the other ships and airboats and the distant horizon. The Aldebaran was 10 miles off to the west, her metal sheathing glinting the red light of the evening sun. There was the Northern Star, down from Skilk, a smaller and more distant twinkle of reflected light to the north of Aldebaran. The Northern Lights was off to the east, and between her and Procyon was a fifth ship. Turning the arm-mounted binoculars around, he could just make out, on her bow, the figurehead bust of a man in an ancient top hat and a fringe of chin-beard. She was the Paul Kruger, captured by the Procyon after a chase across the mountains northeast of Keegark the day before. And, remote from the other ships, to the south, a tiny speck of blue-gray, almost invisible against the sky, and a smaller twinkle of reflected sunlight, a garbage scow, unflatteringly but somewhat aptly rechristened Hildegarde Hernandez, which had been altered as a bomb carrier, and the gun-cutter Elmoran. With the glasses, he could see a bulky cylinder being handled off the scow and loaded onto the improvised bomb catapult on the Elmoran's stern. Shortly thereafter, the gun-cutter broke loose from the tender and began to approach the fleet. "General, I must protest against your doing this," Air Commander Hargreaves said. "There's simply no sense in it. That bomb can be dropped without your personal supervision aboard, sir, and you're endangering yourself unnecessarily. That infernal machine hasn't been tested or anything. It might even let go on the catapult when you try to drop it, and we simply can't afford to lose you now." "No, what would become of us if you go out there and blow yourself up with that contraption?" Berman supported him. "My God, I thought Don Quixote was a Spaniard instead of a German." "Argentino," von Schlichten corrected. "And don't try to sell me that irreplaceable man line, either. The Mzongwe can replace me, Hid O'Leary can replace him, Barney Mordkovitz can replace him, and so on down to where you make a second lieutenant out of some sergeant. We've been all over this last evening. Admitted we can't take time for a long string of test shots, and admitted we have to use an untested weapon. I'm not sending men out under those circumstances and staying here on this ship and watch them blow themselves up. If that bomb's our only hope, it's got to be dropped right, and I'm not going to take a chance on having it dropped by a crew who think they've been sent out on a suicide mission. What happened to the Gaucho when she blew the Smuts up, it's too fresh in everybody's mind. But if I, who ordered the mission, accompany it, they'll know I have some confidence that they'll come back alive." "Well, I'm coming along too, General," Kent Pickering spoke up. "I made the damn thing, and I ought to be along when it's dropped, on the principle that a restaurant proprietor ought to be seen eating his own food once in a while." "I still don't see why we couldn't have made at least one test shot first," Hans Meyerstein, the banking cartel man, objected. "Well, I'll tell you why," Paula Quinton spoke up. "There's a good chance that the geeks don't know we have a bomb of our own. They may believe that it was something invented on Niflheim for mining purposes, and that we haven't realized its military application. There's more than a good chance that the loss of the Jan Smuts has temporarily demoralized them. Personally, I believe that both King Orgzild and Prince Gorgrink were aboard her when she blew up. That's something we'll never know positively, of course. That ship and everything and everybody in her were simply vaporized, and the particles are registering on our Geigers now. But I'm as sure as I am of anything about these geeks that one or both of them accompanied her." "Paula knows what she's talking about," King Kankad jabbered in the Takkad language which they all understood, "just like Von saying that he has to go in our cutter to encourage the crew. They always insist that their kings and generals go into battle, particularly if something important is to be done. They think the gods get angry if they don't." "And we have to hit them now," von Schlichten said. "They still have a couple of bombs left. We haven't been able to locate them with detectors, but those geeks Kankad's men caught on that commando raid last night say that there were at least 3 of them made. We can't take a chance that some fanatic may load one into an air car and make a kamikaze raid on Gongonk Island." The Elmoran ran alongside with her Maasai warrior figurehead and the black cylinder on her catapult aft. Somebody had painted on the bomb "Dire Dawn" by Hildegarde Hernandez, compliments of the author to H. M. King Orgzild of Keegark. A canvas-entubed gangway was run out to connect the ship with the cutter. Von Schlichten and Kent Pickering went down the ladder from the bridge, the others accompanying them. As he stepped into the gangway, Paula Quinton fell in behind him. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded. "Along with you," she replied. "I'm your adjutant, I believe." "You definitely are not going along. Personally, I don't believe there's any danger, but I'm not having you run any unnecessary risks." "Von, I don't know much about the way Terrans think, except about fighting and about making things," Kincaid told him, "and I don't know anything at all about the kind of Terrans who have young. But I believe this is something important to Paula. Let her go with you, because if you go alone and don't come back, I don't think she will ever be happy again." He looked at Kincaid curiously, wondering, as he had so often before, just what went on inside that lizard skull. Then he looked at Paula, and after a moment he nodded. "All right, Colonel, objection withdrawn," he said. Aboard the Elmoran, they gave the bomb a last-minute inspection and checked the catapult and the bomb sight, and then went up onto the bridge. "Ready for the bombing mission, sir?" the skipper, a Lieutenant J.G. Morrison, asked. "Ready if you are, Lieutenant. Carry on. We're just passengers." "Thank you, sir. We thought of going in over the city at about 5,000 for a target check, turning when we're halfway back to the mountains, and coming back for our bombing run at 15,000. Is that all right, sir?" Von Schlichten nodded. "You're the skipper, Lieutenant. You better make sure, though, that as soon as the bomb-off signal's flashed, your engineer hits his auxiliary rocket propulsion button. We want to be about 15 miles from where that thing goes off." The Lieutenant J.G. muttered something that sounded unmilitarily like, "You ain't foolin', brother." "No, I'm not," Von Schlichten agreed. "I saw the Jan Smuts on the TV screen." The Elmoran pointed her bow, and the long blade of the figurehead warrior spear toward Keegark. The city grew out of the ground mist, a parti-colored blur at the delta of the dry Hoork River, and then a color-splashed triangle between the river and the bay and the hills on the landward side, and then it took shape, cross-ruled with streets and granulated with buildings. As they came in, Von Schlichten, who had approached it from the air many times before, could distinguish the landmarks: the site of King Orgzild's nitroglycerin plant, now a crater surrounded by a quarter-mile radius of ruins; the Residency, another crater since Rodolfo MacKinnon had blown it up under him; the smashed Christian Devet at the company docks; King Orgzild's palace, fire-stained, and with a hole blown in one corner by the Aldebaran's bombs. Then they were past the city and over open country. "I wish we had some idea where the rest of those bombs are stored, sir," Lieutenant Morrison said. "We don't seem to have gotten anything significant when we flew reconnaissance with the radiation detectors." "No, about all that was picked up was the main power plant, and the radiation escape from there was normal," Pickering agreed. "The bombs themselves wouldn't be detectable, except to the extent that, say, a nuclear conversion engine for an airboat would be. They probably have them underground somewhere, well shielded." "Those prisoner Kincaid's commandos dragged in only knew that they were in the city somewhere," Von Schlichten considered. "How about midway between the palace and the Residency for our ground zero, Lieutenant? That looks like the center of the city." The cutter turned and started back, having risen another 10,000 feet. Morrison passed the word to the bombardier. The city, with the sea beyond it now, came rushing at them, and Von Schlichten, standing at the front of the bridge, discovered that he had his arm around Paula's waist and was holding her a little more closely than was military. He made no attempt to release her, however. "There's nothing to worry about, really," he was assuring her. "Pickering's boys built this thing according to the best principles of engineering, and the stuff they got out of that big economy-size shilling shocker all checked mathematically." The red light on the bridge flashed, and the intercom shouted, "Bomb off!" He forced Paula down on the bridge deck and crouched beside her. "Cover your eyes," he warned. "You remember what the flash was like in the screen when the Jan Smuts blew up, and we didn't get the worst of it. The pickup on the Gaucho was knocked out too soon." He kept on lecturing her about gamma rays and ultraviolet rays and X-rays and cosmic rays, trying to keep making some sort of intelligent sounds while they clung together and waited, and with the other half of his mind trying not to think of everything that could go wrong with that jerry-built improvisation they had just dumped onto Keegark. If it didn't blow, and the geeks found it, they'd know that another one would be along shortly, and... An invisible hand caught the gun cutter and hurled her end over end, sending Von Schlichten and Paula sprawling at full length on the deck, still clinging to one another. There was a blast of almost palpable sound and a sensation of heat that penetrated even the airtight superstructure of the Elmoran. An instant later there was another, and another, similar shock. 2 more bombs had gone off behind them in Keegark. That meant that they had found King Orgzild's remaining nuclear armament. There were shattering sounds of breaking glass and heavy thumps that told of structural damage to the cutter, and hoarse shouts and lurid cursing as Morrison and his airmen struggled with the controls. The cutter began losing altitude, but she was back on a reasonable